All right, we are on the modern dating. We love it, we hate it panel. If you're in the wrong room, please stay. You might have some fun. All right, we're gonna be talking about everything. We're gonna be talking about happily ever afters. We're gonna be talking about meet cutes. And speaking of, how did you two meet?
Oh my God.
We did like an Amazing Race thing at the Baton Rouge Book Festival.
Yes.
Not on purpose though.
Yeah, it was 2019, fall of 2019, and I think we were both baby debuts, like we had just both debuted. And we were at the Baton Rouge Book Festival, and we kind of, I think, got accidentally forgotten by some of the event staff. But thankfully, I'm from Louisiana, and I've been to many a field trip at the Louisiana State Capitol, so I was like, you want to get in this golf cart with me? And we've just been friends ever since.
Yeah, she was supposed to come host me for my launch of the Happy Ever After playlist, and then COVID hit.
Yes.
So this is like our do-over.
This is our do-over. Yeah.
We love a do-over. We love coming back together after a long time, and we're gonna make this one count. So just as a form of an icebreaker for this one, again, modern dating, we love it, we hate it. What do we love about it?
I love the social media aspects of it. I put a lot of it into my books. I know that can sort of date a book, but I don't care because I think it's so relevant, and that's the world that we're all living in right now.
Oof. That's actually a very difficult question, because I think anybody I speak to who's in the modern dating scene is like, it is dire out here. But I do think that something amazing about modern dating is how many different kinds of people you can encounter through so many different ways now. I know, especially queer people, I know so many people who have met their partner through long distance online friendship and like are now married. I think that's like the #1 way that 20 to 30-year-old lesbians are finding each other these days.
Can't dispute. So it's interesting that they put modern in there. We're talking about contemporary, we're talking about now. There is a sentiment expressed in one of your books towards the end of the book, and we're gonna get deeply into the books in just a couple of minutes, but there's a sentiment expressed by one of the lovers in the books, and it's like, the love stories of yore lied to us, or they sold us something that wasn't exactly true. Care to comment?
So as a married person who's been married for 20 years, for me, the most enduring love stories are not the ones that are overly romantic, or it's not stars in your eyes, it's not dancing under the moon, it's real life. It's taking care of each other when you're sick, it's respecting each other and helping with the kids and being good partners to each other. And there's a little line, I don't want to spoil it, but in Just for the Summer, Justin thinks about this, and that's actually gone really, really viral on the social media platforms that I love so much, because I think it resonates with a lot of people, especially if you've been in a long-term relationship. That is truly what real romance is. And in the book, Justin and Emma never really get what we as romance writers consider to be a traditional love story. They don't, their dates are always interrupted. Their dates are always tinged with, real life dramas that are happening to them. And, what they get is more realistic. And really that's what's beautiful about it, I think, in the end.
I mean, I think that so much of love is about those in-between moments, those small embarrassments and miscommunications and little things that you laugh off with your partner. The big gestures, the big sweeping romantic score in the movies, I think kind of pales in comparison to the casual intimacy of like you and your partner like bumping elbows when you're brushing your teeth and like knocking the toothbrush out of someone else's mouth, I think sometimes that's what love really is a very unglamorous, unsexy thing that becomes so romantic in its specificity and its intimacy.
I think what you both described is what I've come to think of as the extraordinary ordinary. It's like You know, when I think of classic romance, I think, you know, he's a duke, he's a prince, she's a, you know, maiden. You know, people have proximity to fame or wealth or power, you know, but at the end of the day, even, you know, the president or the president's son wants to love and be loved, you know? The extraordinary ordinary. And when you can find that bliss with somebody, it doesn't matter that they're all of those things. It all gets stripped away and it's just person to person. So, you mentioned Emma and Justin, Abby. Would you please tell us a little bit more about the lovers at the center of your new book?
Well, I can give you sort of the elevator pitch for the
Please.
book. Justin and Emma have a curse. Everybody that they date goes on to find the love of their life after they break up. And Justin does this, Am I the A-hole Reddit post that goes viral where he mentions this. And Emma reads it, and Emma reaches out to him. She's like, hey, the same thing happens to me. And they come up with this sort of cockamamie idea that if they date each other, in theory, their curses will cancel each other's out. So Emma, who's a travel nurse, goes to Minnesota to date Justin just for the summer. And of course, things don't go as planned. It's a very realistic love story. I know it's got sort of a tropey premise, but I think the book has got a lot of relatable things in it. It dives deep into mental health and the way that relationships that we have as children shape us and make us who we are as adults.
It's also the third book in a trilogy, and I know you must get this question all of the time, but please, for the uninitiated, is it possible to read this book by itself?
I mean, you can, but I don't think you should. All of my books are standalones, and if you want to get the most out of my books, I recommend starting with Part of Your World, then reading yours truly, and then Just for the Summer, because there's some connections in there, and it'll take you for the best ride if you read them in that order.
Thank you. Okay, Casey, who are the lovers at the center of the pairing?
Yeah, the lovers at the center of the pairing are Theo and Kit, who are two bisexual exes who split up on the plane ride to their dream European food and wine tour 4 years ago, and had to cancel the trip, went their separate ways, didn't see each other again, but were both left with a voucher good for 48 months to go take the trip, because it was not refundable. And so it's been 4 years, and unbeknownst to each other, neither of them have cashed in this voucher yet, and so they book the same tour and don't realize until they get on the same tour bus that they're going to be trapped together for 3 weeks of basically a beautiful, sexy pressure cooker of the most delicious, sumptuous, erotic sights and sounds and smells and flavors of Europe. And then they're gonna see how that goes for them.
Sure. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because with Justin and Emma, they both have this thing, like the next person, when somebody dates them, the next person they go on to, that'll be the one. Kit, in the pairing, kind of has a thing too, maybe to a lesser extent, but what is it?
Well, I think that his thing is he accidentally makes people fall in love with him everywhere he goes.
Why is that?
I mean, I think there's something to be said for somebody who just exudes the air of a romantic. He's such a hopeless romantic that it's just pouring out of him constantly, and I think that can be very alluring and very intoxicating and someone you just are coming across. But I think I also describe it as like he was born with the face of like a fancy little god prince and like this and this absolute earnest interest in everything everyone is saying to him all the time. And so you have this person looking into your eyes and being like, tell me more about yourself. And you're like, should we get married right now? And yeah, it happens.
Among the things he's earnest about is he has been on the quest to make the perfect cinnamon roll.
Yeah.
Abby, care to comment?
Yeah.
Well, as a baker, I actually don't make cinnamon rolls, but I do make a cinnamon roll cupcake that is very fantastic at Nadia Cakes, shameless plug. No, but what I can make is a very excellent cinnamon roll hero. And that is my favorite kind of hero to write, and that is the one that I'm going to keep writing for every single book. And they only get sweeter as time goes on.
When you said cinnamon roll hero, my first thought was like a hero sandwich. I was like, you can make a cinnamon roll that big?
Yeah. Like
but
foot-long
but yes,
cinnamon roll.
a cinnamon roll love hero. Now I understand.
It's a beautiful thing.
I love both ideas.
We are foodies.
For each of you, and whoever wants to go first, have at it. What was your goal that you had in mind when you were writing this specific book? What did you want to explore in this book?
I really wanted to explore, like I said earlier, the way I find relationships fascinating, and I find human nature fascinating, and I find the way that I love unpacking how people end up who they are. It's one of my favorite things. And then putting that in the scope of a relationship, figuring out why Emma is the way she is and how this is a challenge for her in relationships. And I just really wanted to unpack that. And actually, when I was writing this book, I started knowing who I wanted Emma to be. And I use mental health beta readers for all of my books. I use advisors for all of my books because I want them to be accurate and I don't want them to be harmful. And one of the very first things that I did before I even started writing was I sat down with my mental health beta reader, Karen Flood, who's a psychologist, and I said, this is who I need Emma to be. Tell me what would make her this way. How would we get here? How would this person be, have this attachment issue that she's come to have? And, we walked through it. We spent hours going back and forth, really walking through what kind of childhood would create this type of person for this book. And then also what kind of childhood would create Justin and who he ended up being, and how do they end up complementing each other and working for each other or not working for each other. So that's really where I started with, and that's what I wanted to explore just for the summer. And to be honest, I didn't think that this book was going to be as relatable as it is. I actually thought this is my least relatable book. I actually said that to my editor because surely, hardly anyone, has got a mom like Amber, and that actually turned out not to be true. Apparently we all, maybe it's not our mom, but we all have an Amber in our lives. And I also have an Amber in my life, and I think a lot of people felt seen reading this book, saw themselves in the pages or saw themselves in Emma, and maybe some of their decisions about how they handle that person felt validated to them, and that also made me feel seen. So, yes, this book did a lot of things, I think, for a lot of people, including myself.
And for me too, just one reader on a stage. Thank you.
I think for me, I mean, for the uninitiated, I write queer romance specifically, and that is what I do. And I think that queer books have this pressure that other books don't often face as much, which is it needs to be important. Like there are a lot of expectations that your book will educate people in something, or challenge something, or push for progress in some way, which I think are all like really honorable intentions to have when writing a book. But it is also a lot of pressure, especially when romance, I think some of the most progressive and transgressive things about the genre is simply the room it allows for pleasure. Historically, for female pleasure, I think more in more modern era, queer and trans pleasure and pleasure for people who don't often see themselves represented in a pleasure genre, and sometimes that is also quote unquote important to see. And so when I sat down to write the pairing, I think the biggest thing I wanted to do was I wanted to drill down into like what is romance, and to me it is pleasure and it is saying yes to everything. And so this book was sort of an exercise in abundance. Every detail I thought about including, I was like, put it in. It's a sound, it's a sight, it's a smell. I wanted it to be this sensory feast for the reader. I wanted to be so much of everything that it was, because I think that it was, for me, this like sort of response to the way that, I think there's these limitations placed on so much queer literature, especially when it should be also about having fun and romance about embodiment and discovery and connection and all of those things. Sometimes the message is just that we're doing it too. Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly, this book is dedicated for pleasure?
Yeah, the dedication just says for pleasure, which I thought was a fun pun.
A little saucy. And yours, Abby, is dedicated to your readers, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes. When I started writing, and this is sort of what the dedication says, but I was writing as a hobby. I never in a million years thought that I would ever be a published author. I thought you had to have street creds to be a published author. You had to have a blog, like a really popular blog, or have gone to college or something. And I just was writing for fun. I was, writing as a hobby, and I was writing for myself. It was just a way for me to be creative and to, share stories with my daughters in the beginning. And, of course, I ended up getting published, and now so many people are reading my books, and I say this all the time, but it's so fun because it feels like when you're writing a book, it feels like you're watching a really cool TV show that you love, that you can't talk to anyone about because nobody else has seen it. And as soon as it comes out, you have all these people that are watching the same show as you, and you get to talk to them about it. And it's just, my readers have made this whole experience so rewarding and so fun. Like, I genuinely love what I do. And 95% of that is the reader interaction, and 5% of it is the writing.
The joy comes through, the pleasure, the happiness. These books are also really, really funny. And one of the ways that humor shines through is through dialogue. So I want to ask both of you about how you write dialogue, because I read a lot of books. And it doesn't always come off. Sometimes it comes off as like dialogue.
Yeah.
But this sounds like a conversation I'm overhearing that I want to continue listening to.
Yeah.
So how do you think about writing dialogue?
I think it's really tricky because I think one of the big things is chasing the rhythm of a natural conversation. When two funny people in real life are having a conversation, unless they're two really annoying people, it shouldn't just be constant, like that joke and then another joke, and then we're trying to one up the last joke. And so allowing room for people to like enjoy each other's humor and to like play off of each other rather than like trading these little barbs or these little banters. I think real banter is about chemistry and about, responding to each other in the moment and sometimes just having a moment to appreciate how funny that joke just was. I think that is a huge part of it. When I think it starts to not sound as natural is when you can tell the writer's like, look, I'm funny, I can do it again, and I can do it again. And you know what? I have been that writer, and I will be again. But I think that the best banter and the best dialogue scenes for humor always come when these characters are actually enjoying each other's brains.
Yeah, for me, dialogue has always come really natural for me. So the first book that I wrote was actually a really terrible YA dystopian romance that will never, ever see the light of day. And I put it on a site called Critique Circle, which is like my #1. If you want to learn how to write, even if you want to learn how to write good dialogue, join Critique Circle. It's got so many forums, so many resources for budding writers. They'll teach you, where to put the beats in dialogue and, structurally how to write good dialogue. And I had submitted this terrible YA romance onto Critique Circle, and of course the strangers of the internet, who will always tell you the truth, did, and they were like, this is a terrible YA romance. However, your dialogue was really fantastic. So I decided to trunk that book and write a new one, a contemporary romance, so that I didn't have to do too much world building. And I was gonna lean really heavily on the dialogue that I knew I was good at, and I wrote the Happy Ever After playlist. That was actually my first book that I ever wrote, not The Friend Zone. Which is why the Friend Zone, certain things had to happen, because it already happened, because the Happy Ever After playlist was first. So don't be mad at me, okay, if you've read the Friend Zone. So in terms of dialogue, one of my best practices is I always read it out loud. It sounds one way in your brain, but if you read it out loud, you'll feel the sort of bumpy delivery of the lines. You'll feel if the pacing is off. Sometimes pacing can be fixed just by changing, when you put pauses or breaks, or even things like I said. And reading it out loud really helps me with that. So one of my processes when I'm near the end of the first draft of my book is I call my sister-in-law, and she puts me on mute. She puts herself on mute, not me. And I read the book to her for the next 8 hours over the phone, and she gets to hear the book early, and I get to hear if there's any clunky dialogue. And to what Casey said, you also have to think about who these characters are and how that character would speak, what crutch words they would use when they're talking, because your characters are all different people, even side characters. What crutch words would they use? What cadence would they use? Do they speak with an accent, and how does that translate into the lines that you're writing? But honestly, just reading it out loud helps so much.
Yeah, highly recommend reading it out loud too, although I don't have anyone in my life who listens to me read for 6 hours, so I'll work on that.
Oh, I bet you we could have some volunteers here in this audience.
There's a lot for anybody in the audience who writes romance, there's a lot of good information to glean here. So maybe I will ask for a writing tip next, and let's turn from humor to steam. I'm going to take this opportunity to pause now and remind you that at the end of our session, there will be time for you to come up and ask a question of these lovely authors if you should so choose. There are microphones on both sides of the auditorium, so be thinking about anything that might lead from today's conversation that goes unanswered by the time we open it up for questions. Also, I'd like to remind you that a question ends in a question mark. Thank you very much. So back to steam.
Back to steam.
What advice would you give to a fellow romance writer on writing sex scenes?
For me, it's not so much about the physical aspects, but about the emotional aspects between those characters. So, you know, in my books, typically, I know Part of Your World was a bit of a break from my norm, but you know, typically we don't have those scenes with my characters until we are so invested emotionally into both of them and how that plays out. You know, with Part of Your World, it opens up with a one-night stand, but we don't actually see that one-night stand on the page because, again, we're not invested yet in seeing that interaction between the two characters. So for me, when I'm building up steam, I'm building it up through intimacy. You know, the characters, they're in love by the time that's happening with them. For me, that's what I love when I'm writing my characters.
I mean, I think that it is, first of all, I love that we're talking about this at a Library of Congress event. This makes me very happy.
Thank you for having us, Library of Congress.
But no, I mean, I think sometimes the sexiest thing about a moment or a scene is not necessarily what's literally happening, but those things that are sexy are seeing someone in that place, in that zone for the first time, like seeing that character through the eyes of the person who's learning like what kind of sounds they make, what their breath sounds like where the freckles that you've never seen before. Those little moments, I think what we were talking about, like the extraordinary ordinary. I think sometimes it's tempting to just get bogged down in the blocking of it all, and then it just sounds like you're describing a game of Twister from memory, and like left foot red, and it's not exactly. And so I think that sometimes what's more important is exactly what you're saying, like focusing on what these characters are feeling, what they're discovering about each other through this moment of intimacy, what they're discovering about their own feelings, where it's like, I didn't know when I touched them in this way that like it would ignite this feeling in my body, and I think that's what a true intimate moment can be about. And so, I don't know, I think that we get a little nervous around steam and around, you know, whether that is a detraction from like the literary merit of a book, but I actually think that a strong intimacy scene is one of the hardest things to write because there's not only the moving parts of it all, but the tension, and then the building of the tension, and the resistance, and then the magnets pulling and pushing, I think is such a difficult craft to master. And the best romance novels, I think, are written by some of like the greatest geniuses of character tension and using language to build almost a physical reaction in the reader. I think that's like alchemy. That's magic. Yeah.
Magic.
Yeah.
Speaking of literary merit, I couldn't help but notice that we're on the main stage of the National Book Festival. Furthermore, we are one of 3 genre fiction panels on the main stage of the National Book Festival. No other category is getting more airtime on the main stage of the National Book Festival this year. Does that feel so very right to you?
It feels very right to me. Casey, does it feel right to you?
Yes. I mean, I think we always say in this industry, like the open secret, the best kept open secret in this industry is that romance keeps the lights on. Yeah. And it's wonderful to see it celebrated.
I really like that, and it's a phrase I'm going to carry with me. I also, you know that I'm a fan of kind of the one-liners that accompany your books. With The Pairing, it was...
Some things taste better together.
right.
It's a triple entendre.
Abby, do you do lines?
I have a lot of really great lines in my books. Do people get your lines tattooed on them?
Yes, they do.
They do. That blows my mind. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I hope I never do anything to disappoint you because it's going to be there forever. No, I always try in my books to have, at least one very quotable line, and I never go into it knowing what that line's going to be. It just sort of speaks to me as I'm writing. In Part of Your World, that line was "Grace costs you nothing." And Yours truly, "Be harmless to each other." That's like an ongoing theme in the book. And, I just love that though, when readers just hang on to that and they, print it out or put it on a shirt to come see me on book tour, or they tattoo it on themselves. It's incredible to know that you've made that impact on somebody, or that you've spoken something into the literary world that people don't ever want to forget. That's an amazing feeling.
I was just gonna say, it just reminds me of like when I was a teenager, I was like obsessed with taking one line from a poem or a book or a song and like writing it on my shoes or something, like how like teenagers do stuff like that because you think it makes you look very cool. But it's like this, it was this gateway of like these little nuggets of creative turn of phrase that gets stuck in your mind and become this gateway of like, I want to learn how to command language like this. I think that is such a delicious little entryway into becoming your own kind of writer.
What was your delicious little entryway into romance, both of you as readers, I'm assuming? Do you remember your first romance or?
So I grew up going to libraries, and I became a reader very early on. Being a reader is what made me a writer. And I remember the very first time I was introduced to romance. It was in history class in high school, and the girl in front of me used to read Bodice Rippers, like the mass market with Fabio on the cover.
Good for her.
I know. I wish I knew her name. I want to find my old yearbook and find her and be like, thank you. But I would lean, look over her shoulder, and these books always had these absolutely stunning covers. I mean, that was just, they were gorgeous. And they made me interested in what was in them. So she would hand them back to me, I would take them home, I'd read them, and we would, she would bring a different book to school almost every other day, and I would read those books. That was my foray into romance, and I loved it. And I just found myself chasing romance, even when I was reading outside of the genre. I just always loved the romance within any genre that I was reading. And even in movies, I just love the romance. And, for a long time, I had kids. I started Naughty Kicks Out of my house. I was very busy for a very long time and sort of lost, my reading journey. I didn't have time. And when I did get back into it, romance was the number one thing that I reached for. I was reading Outlander series. I loved, and I know this isn't, a romance, but I loved the, gosh, I just lost it. The Mockingjay.
Oh, Hunger Games?
Hunger Games. I love that tension, when it's like, will she, won't she, which guy? I just got really.
Were you Team Peter or Team Gale?
Oh, PETA.
Okay.
PETA.
Sorry, I just needed to know that.
No, I just love the romance in any book that I reach for. And I came to a point where, I kept chasing a certain kind of romance read that I wanted to read, and it made me want to write it. And that's what actually got me to sit down and start writing my first book, was, wanting to write the kind of romances I wanted to read.
It's so funny. I've never heard you talk about your origins trying to write young adult fantasy first before finding your way to like your true fit. Because I had a very similar journey where I was also struggling with extremely bad, unfinished YA fantasy manuscripts, because that was what I had read primarily. And I was like, well, that's what I write. That's what people write, And it turns out world building is really hard. And the thing about contemporary romance is the world we live in.
Yes.
And so
much easier.
And the world building you do is more like, okay, so like, what does the inside of her cupcake shop look like? That makes it sound much easier than it is. Some of the historical romance writers I read are more versed than the leading historians in the world on like historical fashion, exactly how many multiples of eyelets a corset should have. These are the real juggernauts of history.
They do the work.
But to answer the question, I have a sister who's 8 years older than me, who's a voracious reader. And when I was like 11 and she was 19, I remember her having, the pulpy like supermarket like mass market paperback where it's like slide it into your pocket size. And I remember stealing Full Tilt by Janet Ivanovich from her shelf, and like squirreling it away in my room, I remember literally like making a little like cubby behind my desk, so it was like a summer afternoon and I could read the whole thing without anyone knowing, and get it back to her shelf before she got home from work that day. And that was my first romance, and it was just like eyes bugging out of my head, like this is allowed, like this is a genre. like I thought that I had to exactly what you're saying, find the love stories inside a bigger story, and I didn't know the love story could be the story. So that was like my first one, and then I think, I got older and I'm a member of like the Twilight generation, and so like, the Hunger Games generation, the generation of young readers who really like cut their teeth on like these huge YA fantasy or like YA dystopia or YA sci-fi books, and thought that was the path. And then I think it was The Royal We by, I'm gonna get their names right. Hey, Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, is that right? Did I get their names? Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I always mix up their last names, but I read The Royal We, and it was my first contemporary romance I had read in a long time, and I was like, God, I forgot how much I love this genre. This feels like home. And it just like everything fell into place, and I had an idea. I had the idea for Red, White, and Royal Blue like probably 6 months later, and it just felt so natural. It just like flowed, and I think that is like how I knew it was where I was supposed to be. Yeah.
And everybody always says that they want to read, that, like you talking about it, they're probably like, oh my gosh, I would just love to read that YA book that you start. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't like it. Trust me. It was
No.
Mine. I can't speak for Casey, but mine was bad. You never want that.
Mine incomprehensible.
And I think it makes a good point too, is that I think sometimes there's a perception that you just, got published on your first book and just, hit the ground running, and that's very, very rarely true. There's very often many books that preceded the book that you finally got published with. And in my case, it was 3 very terrible YA dystopian romance novels that no one will ever see. And it's all practice. That's the thing, is that there is no wasted writing. Even if nobody ever sees it, that's practice, because I'm sure your YA book helped you become the writer that you are now.
Oh, completely. I think all the time about this quote. I think it's from the author Erin Bow, I want to say, but she was talking about how it's relating bad writing to like the active yeast in a kitchen and where you're making sourdough bread, and how like the bakers will use those yeast to like mop the floors, and it's all just in the air. Even the worst loaf is not wasted because it's enriching the doughs that come out of the oven every time. And I think that's what writing is like. There's no word wasted, because every word teaches you something you didn't know before.
Abby, care to comment on yeast?
I thought that was a very good analogy, and also tied really well in with the pairing.
Oh, yes, okay, yeast in the sense of bread. Okay, got it. Okay.
Back to these 2 excellent books. Is there a song if the couples in these books, if the lovers in these books had a song you'd associate with them, what would it be?
The Next Time I Fall in Love by Peter Gabriel. I think I actually slipped that into the book. When I'm writing, I always have a playlist that no one will ever see. It's just for me. And it's just songs that make me think about the characters or fit with the theme in the book. And, of course, if you've read that book, you understand why that song would work. But yeah, there's always a playlist for me, a secret hidden playlist for every novel.
For me, it's actually like mentioned in the book as like it was their go-to karaoke song when they were together, which is "Can't Stop Loving You" by Phil Collins, and I think it definitely becomes a bit prophetic for them. Yeah.
I was at Starbucks this morning thinking obsessively about your books, and on comes I'm Every Woman by Shaka Khan.
Ooh,
Got me really psyched for this event.
really amped,
Yeah, it really can augment the experience. I have kind of a random romance question. Is the grand gesture on its way out?
Oh.
I don't think so.
I feel like the grand gesture is having like a retooling, because I feel like when I was coming up, like as a teenager, the grand gesture was like Ryan Gosling in The Notebook being like, I'm gonna drop myself off this Ferris wheel and die if you don't go on a date with me. And I think we've gotten to the point where we're like, that's not great. Like it's a bit manipulative and like not cute. And like
That's a very good point.
You shouldn't literally threaten to die. But I think that we're reassessing what a grand gesture can mean. Sometimes a grand gesture, a friend of mine proposed to his wife in Spain and arranged, like literally like learned some Spanish so that he could arrange for a photographer to be there when he proposed to her. And to me, the gesture of that is the planning and the effort and like the way he was like, she's gonna want photos of this, and I'm gonna learn like 17 words of Spanish to make that happen. That's a gesture. I think that we're learning like a real grand gesture is about actually knowing someone and knowing exactly what would be so meaningful to them.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think the grand gestures of yore were a little bit toxic. And I think as a society, we are very thankfully moving beyond that. But you know, I just can't see, you know, books not having some sort of grand gesture, but having them, to your point, be very thoughtful and mindful, you know, and something that isn't things that we wouldn't want someone to actually do to us in real life. Because a lot of those 1990s rom-coms that we love so much, I think you'd be sort of horrified if somebody actually did some of that stuff to you in real life. Like, please don't do that. No, but I love my grand gestures. I love them.
I love them too, but I think if we were to do a family feud of the most horrifying ones, it'd be like, ding, Jumbotron.
Yes. Oh my God. In The Wedding Singer, which I loved as a teenager, when he like literally disrupts her entire flight to like sing her a song on acoustic guitar that goes on for like 2 full minutes in front of the whole plane, I would jump out.
I know, isn't it so fun? I watch a lot of those a lot of those movies back, movies that I loved when I was younger, and I'm like, oh, but that's not, no. Yeah, I fully agree. Some of them are kind of horrifying.
In about 4 minutes or 3 minutes 43 seconds, excuse my math, we are going to open it up for audience questions, so you can start to approach the microphone if you got a really hot one. But I've got another one for you both. In each of your books, respectively, we get chapters from the perspectives of each lover. Casey, in your book, we get half of the book from Theo's perspective, and then we shift to Kit's. And Abby, in your book, every other chapter, we switch off between Emma and Justin. How did you arrive at this perspective-sharing way of telling their respective love stories?
It just felt very natural to me to do dual POVs because I want to see what they're each thinking. And as a reader, when I read, or any book really, I love to know, I like to have that little insider info as a reader to know what is in that character's head. It's almost like being in on a secret, you know, if we're in one character's POV and they're thinking one thing, you know, we know because we've read the other character's POV what they're actually thinking. I love that. And I feel like it builds so much more intimacy for the reader with the characters to understand their thought processes and who they are as people, you know, why they're behaving the way that they are. I don't think I would ever write a book without it.
I really admire writers like you who can do a dual POV alternating and still manage to keep that like propulsive forward motion of tension between the two characters, even though the reader can see the miscommunications happening. For me, I really struggled when I decided I wanted to do dual POV. I knew I wanted to, I mean, a second chance romance, you kind of got to hear both sides. Like every breakup, the two parties are going to have a different idea of exactly how and why and who won the breakup or how over the other person is, you know, kind of, I needed both sides. But I was really struggling with how to build that tension because in my books I feel like a lot of my like conflict tension comes from one character feeling so much but not knowing how to initiate that contact because they don't know how the other person feels, and the reader doesn't really know how the other person feels, and that there's that moment of release the first time you see that character acknowledge the attraction on page. So I was really struggling with how to do this dual POV alternating, and then I was my Brazilian publisher sent me on tour in Brazil with another of their authors, E. Lockhart, who wrote We Were Liars. And we were literally like on the gondola in Rio, and I was just like venting to her about this creative issue I was having, and she was like, "Oh, we'll just do the first half from one POV and the second half another." And I was like, well, it was another one of those moments where like that's allowed, like you can do that, it was so fun to do it that way because to me, I felt like I was able to structure each half almost like its own like 50,000 word novella with the beginning, a middle, and an end in a sort of abbreviated traditional 3-act structure, to give each character their own little arc that was happening over the course of their perspective. And that was really delicious because both of them had separate lessons they needed to learn from their breakup and their reconciliation and how they've grown since. And so it was a really interesting craft puzzle for me that was incredibly rewarding to do, and now I'm like, I don't know how to go back. Yeah.
We are at 15 minutes and the lines are deep. So
Yeah.
I am going to open it up to questions, but thank you so much for your generosity with me in conversation.
Thank you, Megan.
Very much. And now we shall open it up for questions starting on this side of the room.
I am so sorry. I'm probably going to have a shaky voice because I'm very nervous. What a privilege to be standing in front of both of you. Abby, you were my favorite author, so I'm going to try not to cry. I'm going to be quick. I thought it was interesting that you said that be harmless to one another was the most memorable line in yours truly, because Love Shows Up has actually been the most for me and everybody in my life that loves your books. So much so it was in my best friend's wedding vows. Literally, we love you so much. And so my question is Love Shows Up a principle that you follow in your life, or was this just true to Brianna and Jacob?
I can tell you that almost every single one of my books has real aspects of my life reflected into it. Whether it's, the way that I feel about relationships because of the wonderful marriage that I get to be in. I can tell you that in my marriage, my husband definitely shows up for me. That for me it's a love language, love showing up. Every single one of my books reflects my real life and my real views on what love should look like.
Thank you so much.
What's your name?
My name's also Brianna, actually.
Thank you for your question, Brianna.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I actually lived in Canoga Park, California when I was a teenager. I had no idea I lived so close to Pulp Fiction film sites, so thank you. I'm also a nurse, and I noticed certain phrases in your books like sedation vacation and other things. It made really obvious to me that either there's someone in your life who is a nurse, or you took the time to get beta readers who are in the medical field. What is it?
It's that one. While I do know quite a few nurses now, one thing that I really learned, especially off of the Friend Zone. So the Friend Zone was the only book that I did not have advisors on. I didn't have sensitivity readers on. I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And every book since then, I made it a point to get sensitivity readers, get beta readers, because I don't ever want anyone thrown out of one of my stories for something that's very easily researched. Or to cause harm by depicting something inaccurately or inauthentically. So for every single book, for example, just for the summer, I know I mentioned that I had, a mental health beta reader, which I use on every book. I also had doctors that I interviewed. You can always check the acknowledgements to see the due diligence that I do in my books, but I have a lot of nurses that I have read my books. And actually, funny story, one of the nurses, I said, if you were a travel nurse, what department would you absolutely hate to end up in?
Med-surg.
And she was like, med-surg. And I was like, just to be thorough, I'm gonna make sure that I ask more than one nurse. And they all said med-surg. Yeah. So med-surg it was. But no, I do a lot of due diligence to make sure that things are accurate, because I don't ever want anyone, like a nurse reading my book, to be like, that's not how it is. I don't want to do the Grey's Anatomy version of it, where I know it drives all of you bonkers because Grey's Anatomy isn't accurate to, the medical world. It doesn't have to be like that. We could do a good job. So yes, I've got a lot of advisors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I have a question for Casey. I grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up in a community kind of like Shara Wheeler and Chloe Green and all them. And I think it's very interesting across all your books, but especially I Kiss Shara Wheeler and Red, White, and Royal Blue in Conversation, to look at them through a lens of religion, because they have very different perspectives on it.
Yeah.
Like, there's some kind of just like throwaway like Catholic moment things in Red, White, and Royal Blue, but there's also like very extremely deep spiritual moments like the DNA and like the entire Texas Lake House experience. So I was wondering if you've thought about those books in conversation with each other in terms of religion.
Yeah, totally. I think the way that, to me, like coming from my own personal experience, like I was raised Catholic, but I went to Southern Baptist school for most of my like adolescence, and it was like, ironically, in that environment, you start to feel like, wow, Catholics are so laid back, which I don't think has ever been said about Catholics before. But I'm like, yeah, it's like they're like the fun uncle, And so I think I always like related a lot more deeply to Catholicism because I saw it as so much more permissive, which again is very funny. So to me, like, I really have always related to like the spirituality of like ritual and like aesthetic beauty. Like so much of Catholicism, I think, is concerned with like stained glass windows and chanting, and I'm like, sign me up, baby. And then like so much of the environments that I felt were stifling to me were this sort of like kind of repackaged as less repressive, but were ideologically much more restrictive. Like the no dancing, no drinking, no Halloween kind of stuff. I was like, whoa, this is a lot. And so I don't know. I think in Red, White, and Royal Blue, Alex being Catholic is very much a function of him like being from Texas and having like half of his family being Mexican and all of those things. But they're also kind of a reflection of a more romanticized spirituality, where I think Shara, as a book, is more concerned with the darker sides of certain kinds of Christianity. But I think that both are about both of them, I think, allow everything to be true, where it's like, I think in Shara, as much as there is harm and like spiritual abuse that happens in environments like that, at the same time, you can't dismiss it all out of hand, because we're all on this kind of spiritual journey together, and for some of us, we find meaning in different things, and we find hope and we find purpose in spirituality, and I always wanted that book to feel like empathetic to that as well. But yeah, I think the conversation there is mostly I was going to CCD in the afternoons and Bible class in the mornings, and then Bible class they were like, oh, you're definitely going to hell for going to CCD, which is like so funny. It's like wait, they told me the other way like last night. I'm confused. Yeah, so that's why Alex has a better relationship with Catholicism than Chloe does with fundamentalist Christianity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my question is for Abby. So we've talked a lot about romance, but one of the things that I love about your books is actually the female friendships. So if you can highlight kind of why you always portray these beautiful friendships in all of your books, but also the role that they play in real life romances.
I think female friendships, actually any of the friendships in the book is so important. Not only do they play a role in the book to lampshade certain things, so the writer's term, okay, lampshading, means a character or the author inserts something into the book to let you know that they are aware of this thing that you as the reader are getting irritated about or worried about, okay? An example of that would be Maddie being like, girl, be so freaking for real, that guy's amazing, what is your problem? That was Maddie's role in Just for the Summer, was to lampshade some of these things, that you as the reader are thinking. So she plays that role. But also, I just love that dynamic. And I actually told my editor when I was writing Just for the Summer, I feel like this book is not just a love story between Justin and Emma, but it's also a love story between Maddie and Emma. These are two people that have this soulmate bond. It's a platonic bond, it's a friendship bond, but they are soulmates. Maddie's going to be with Emma for the rest of her life, and I think that was just so important to depict. And it helps too when the guys have friends as well. In the books, obviously the female. I know, right? It's good when they've got buddies. No, but I mean, so that somebody's telling them they're being an idiot. You know what I mean? Like you need that role. I love writing those friendships, and I will always do that in my books. And I think that probably started with the Happy Ever After playlist. They say that your first book is sort of always from your POV, right? Because you don't know how to write strangers yet. You're not an experienced author. So when I wrote the Happy Ever After playlist, I very much modeled Kristen, the best friend in that book, on my own best friend, Lindsay. And Lindsay's love story, her struggle in her relationship was really based around infertility, which is why the friend zone, which was Kristen's story, was based off of my best friend's own infertility struggle from start to finish. I modeled Kristen's infertility journey literally word for word after what happened to my own best friend. So that's why you felt such a strong female friendship between those two books, is because really I was writing myself into Sloane and I was writing my best friend into Kristen. And I just loved how that felt so much that I just continued to do that in every single book that I could. And I continue to do it in my next book as well, the one that comes out next year in April.
Thank you for your question.
Hi guys, I recently finished writing my debut novel, contemporary romance, and I started pitching agents. I did it, originally started pitching at a conference, and I got over 15 requests, including 2 full manuscripts, which is all very exciting, but I want some of the big guys. I think these agents are amazing, but Abby, I just pitched yours, and I didn't use a dick joke like I heard you did when you pitched your agent. So my question to you guys is, how do you get your agent? I know, Casey, yours is closed for furries right now, so we put that one on hold. So yeah, I would love to the ones I already got requested from are amazing, and I'm so grateful. But it seems like there's 3 agents who rep most romance authors. So what's the secret to getting that?
Well, I can tell you that Critique Circle is, again, a fantastic resource. Critique Circle will have forums answering how to write a great query letter. It'll have so many different resources on how to do that. And that's the source that I used when I wrote my query letter. I can tell you that you want to look for somebody not only who reps what you write, but also somebody that you like, because you're going to spend a very, very long time with your agent. Check out their social media. Make sure you like their sense of humor, because you don't want a fake laugh for the next 10 years. And Stacy was actually a boutique agent. She wasn't at a big literary agency, and that wasn't really important to me. I wanted to find somebody that I could have a good time with, somebody that was passionate about the books that I was writing. So that's what I sought out, not really a big, top tier who's, Stacy was very new when I met her. She'd only been agenting for 2 years and was at a very small boutique agency in Minnesota. But yeah, I would just say, make your query letter as voicey as possible, so it reflects you as a writer and, maybe the characters in the story that you're selling. Be yourself, tailor it to the person that you're sending it to. Don't send a form. Just picture how you would want someone to send you something. Do you want to feel like you're being solicited and it's spammy and it's like you're sending something, that you're sending to everyone, or do you want to feel personalized and them really get a feeling of who you are? And yes, mine had a D joke in it. I don't know what I can say here at the Library of Congress.
Well done.
It did, but it reflected my voice. It was funny, it was conversational, and that's what she picked up on. Not necessarily the joke itself, but the fact that you could kind of get through in my query letter what kind of writer I was and what kind of person I was through the voice in my query letter.
If I could just add real quick, sometimes it's good to not be with someone who's got an absolutely jam-packed list of bestseller after bestseller after bestseller, because that means they're incredibly busy, and they might, if you are somebody who wants a more editorial type of agent, somebody who's going to respond really fast and read really fast, those people might not be the best fit for you. I would sometimes encourage people to like look up the agents for people whose writing you really admire, because that's how you know you're going to really vibe with the agent. Sometimes I feel like the end product is very tempting to go for the people who are, repping the most bestsellers or the ones who are getting the biggest deals. But when you're building a creative relationship like that, like Abby was saying, I think you also want to make sure it's somebody whose like creative instincts and tastes like really inspire you and you think you can grow with them. That's just my 2 cents. Sometimes it's better to be a little quieter and you're stable, and to know that you can have a bit more of your agent's time and attention.
I agree with that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. If I could just add one more question.
I'm sorry, we really got to keep it rolling. Speaking of jam-packed, we have a couple of minutes left, and that is it. Do you want to do 2 more questions, or do you want to do a lightning round?
I'm not in charge.
Okay.
I always get hung up on lightning round, so let's do another question.
Okay, 2 more questions, and it's got to be fast.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, but everybody, you should know you can go and have your book signed later. Please buy the books, wait in the line, sign them. You might have your moment then. Your question, please.
I'm Laura. This question is inspired by Casey, but for both of you.
Okay.
How do you keep the research process from overwhelming or stopping the writing process?
I loved how speedily you delivered that
We
question.
appreciate you.
Thank you. Okay, now we got to speedily wrap up the applause.
Okay.
Okay, that's a great question. I get overwhelmed by research a lot, but I think that the most important thing about it is to think about what's actually going to be interesting to the reader. Just because you researched it and you know it, and like it feels like a waste of time to cut it out of the book, your reader really is here to read these 2 characters like smash, and like quite frankly, like they don't need to know that you know a historically accurate hairstyle all the time, and it's really wonderful that you do, but they don't need to know that all the time. I think if it's actually enriching the experience of reading the book, and like for me with the pairing, it was a lot about what was enhancing the environment and immersing the reader in like this place and the way that Theo and Kit were experiencing the place, then I put it in. But yeah, you can really get like down the rabbit hole and in the weeds, and you have to kind of reel it back sometimes and think like, if I'm a reader, do I need to know this?
Yeah,
Library of Congress for stealing an extra minute. 1 more question.
Sorry, it's okay.
I'll be quick as well. My question's for Casey. When you were doing your travel research trip for the pairing, what did you feel like was the most influential experience you had in your writing of the book?
Oh, definitely when I was in Florence and I went to the Uffizi Gallery and I saw The Birth of Venus. That's like what my like tattoo I got for the pairing is The Birth of Venus. I just feel like the aesthetics of it, the gender of it, the beautiful sensuality of it was so like the embodiment of what the book was, and that book really is about embodiment. But yeah, I would say Birth of Venus. Done. Final answer.
I would say just for the summer, I would say the pairing, and I would say thank you once more to these amazing authors.